Donald Trump just left Beijing. Xi Jinping just watched him go. And the rest of the world? Well, we're all still trying to figure out what actually happened behind those crimson walls. For 2 days, the leaders of the world's two largest economies met at the Great Hall of the People. This was the very first U.S. presidential state visit to China in nearly 9 years. They had state banquets, they toured the Temple of Heaven, they even sat down for some Kung Pao chicken. But to understand what this summit actually achieved, we have got to look way past the pageantry.
Because when you look at the public statements, it's almost like they attended two completely different meetings. On one hand, you have President Trump claiming they hammered out fantastic trade deals that settled a whole bunch of problems. But on the other hand, you have President Xi Jinping intensely referencing the Thucydides trap, that dangerous historical tendency where a rising power and an established power inevitably go to war, and issuing some severe warnings about potential clashes over Taiwan.
So to make sense of this massive geopolitical puzzle, in this explainer, we're going to cover the delayed billionaire summit, trade deals versus structural reality, Taiwan as the ultimate red line, the shadow of Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, and finally, what all of this means for India. Let's jump right into part 1, the delayed billionaire summit.
The fact that this meeting happened right now, in May 2026, is a massive story in itself. The two leaders initially met over in Busan back in October 2025 and penciled in this state visit for April. But then, the Iran war broke out. The whole thing had to be pushed back. And that delay is absolutely crucial context because it completely flipped the geopolitical leverage heading into these talks.
And when Trump did finally touch down in Beijing, he definitely didn't travel alone. He brought a literal army of corporate firepower with him. 17 of America's absolute most powerful CEOs came along for the ride. We're talking the absolute heavy hitters here. Elon Musk, Tim Cook, NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, who, by the way, reportedly hopped on the plane after getting a direct phone call from the president. It just goes to show that despite all the strategic rivalry and friction, the sheer business gravity of this relationship is undeniable, especially when it comes to the tech sector. Which brings us to part 2, trade deals versus structural reality. Let's talk numbers for a second. 200. That is exactly how many Boeing jets China officially agreed to buy during this trip. Now, on paper, a huge airplane deal sounds like a massive win, right? But here's the catch. Back during Trump's last state visit in 2017, China ordered 300 jets. This time around, the industry and the markets were banking on an order of 500 jets. So that 200 number actually fell way short. Boeing shares literally dropped after the announcement. It's a classic example of how political optics don't always match market expectations. Now, there were a bunch of other highly specific transactional deals. The U.S. Commerce Department gave the green light to sell NVIDIA H200 chips to 10 Chinese firms, while simultaneously pushing for guarantees on rare earth minerals. They also talked about choking off the flow of fentanyl precursors and putting some basic guardrails around artificial intelligence. And in return for all that, China pushed incredibly hard for broader tariff stability. But if we zoom out, experts over at CSIS point out a huge structural contrast going on here regarding economic competitiveness. The current U.S. approach is extremely transactional. It's an America-first strategy laser-focused on shrinking bilateral trade deficits. Meanwhile, China is basically playing a totally different game. They're actively championing their own flavor of globalization, deliberately stepping right into the massive global trade vacuum the U.S. left behind when it pulled out of the TPP. All right, let's move into the really tense stuff. Part 3, Taiwan, the ultimate red line. I just want you to hear this direct quote from President Xi for a second to really let the gravity sink in. Taiwan independence and cross-strait peace are as irreconcilable as fire and water. According to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Xi explicitly stated that Taiwan is the single most important issue in U.S.-China relations, period. And you could literally feel the tension building up. Before he even landed, President Trump shattered historic norms by saying he'd negotiate U.S. arms sales to Taiwan directly with Beijing. China's response was a blunt warning that mishandling Taiwan risks actual clashes and even conflicts. But then we saw this incredible flex of diplomatic leverage. During the actual days of the summit, Chinese warplanes completely stopped flying near Taiwan, a sudden, eerie calm right in the middle of a storm. Which leads us to part 4, Iran and the Hormuz Shahau. You really have to ask yourself, how does a war raging in the Middle East end up giving China the upper hand at a negotiating table in Beijing? Well, CSIS breaks it down perfectly. The U.S. military is incredibly stretched right now, heavily diverted away from the Indo-Pacific to deal with the Middle East. At the same time, China remains Iran's absolute biggest oil customer, meaning they have real influence in Tehran. With Iran essentially choking off the Strait of Hormuz and blocking a fifth of the world's oil supply, the U.S. found itself in a spot where it literally needed Beijing to step in and help reopen those shipping lanes. And the U.S. actually did get something critical out of that dynamic. The defense secretary confirmed that China gave high-level assurances that they absolutely will not arm the Iranian military with advanced weapons, specifically ruling out surface-to-air missiles. They also agreed the Strait of Hormuz has to stay open, with China even looking to buy U.S. oil to replace what they're missing from the Middle East. So, bringing it all together, let's look at Part 5, what this means for India. Think about it. With the U.S. and China hashing out global security, massive trade deals, and Middle Eastern wars over tea in the Zhongmanhai Gardens, where exactly does this leave New Delhi? It's a really tricky spot. The U.S. establishment increasingly looks at India as this crucial democratic counterweight in the Indo-Pacific, basically the left arm to Japan's right arm. But over in New Delhi, there is serious anxiety. They are genuinely worried that a highly transactional U.S. administration might just bypass its regional allies entirely to strike an exclusive grand bargain directly with Beijing. This quote from CSIS absolutely nails the vibe right now. If we do a grand bargain with China, the Indians will feel let down. And that is exactly why India, and honestly, folks in Japan and South Korea too, were watching this Trump-Xi meetup with such intense nervousness. They need reassurance that they aren't going to be left out in the cold just so the U.S. can make a quick deal. So, putting it all together, the delayed timeline, the corporate deals that maybe fell a little short of expectations, the severe warnings over Taiwan, and that massive shadow cast by the Iran war. Did anyone actually win this summit, or is this highly orchestrated state visit just the calm before the next geopolitical storm? Based on everything we've unpacked in this explainer today, I'm going to leave you with that provocative thought to consider. Thanks so much for tuning in.